It's one thing to arrest quarantine violators, but to humiliate them like that, what for?
At least people were quick to post it on social media. Otherwise, these abuses could have gone unnoticed. Mula po sa Quezon City, ako si Robbie Alampay, Puma-Podcast.
And I'm Ted Te, former Supreme Court spokesperson, flag lawyer, and host of the podcast Ted Talks.
In this special series of Teka Teka, we look back at events that have taken place during the ongoing COVID lockdown. And we talk about how they've impacted not only on public health, not only on the economy, but on the rights and freedoms of Filipinos. In the first few months of community quarantine in the Philippines, a lot of things were still uncertain. People were asked to stay indoors. Police and military personnel put up checkpoints in every street. Curfew violators in many barangays were rounded up in the evenings, and people who were caught not wearing masks, some were arrested.
You have checkpoints manned by police, in full battle gear, which I actually don't understand. No? Anong gera ba ito? But you don't see doctors taking the lead in the checkpoints. I think it depends really on the perspective employed by government. No? There's a saying, and it's much abused. If the only thing you have a hammer, every problem is a nail. No? That has been the problem from the very start. Government has looked at this pandemic not as a public health issue, but more as a law enforcement issue. And that's why the police are the ones taking the lead. That's why the military are the ones taking the lead. In fact, the main implementer is a general, no? Not even a public health person. And so that defines the problem.
All over social media, videos and photos of quarantine violators being punished were going viral. Violence and humiliation were some of the tactics used to enforce quarantine measures. All over social media, people were posting and sharing videos of violators being beaten up by the police or being kept in dog cages.
A barangay captain from Pampanga punishes LGBTQ plus constituents for violating curfew by ordering them to kiss each other and do a sexy dance in front of a minor.
Over in Sampaloc, Manila, dozens of curfew violators were picked up, but instead of sending them home, authorities kept them overnight at a covered court.
From the very start of the pandemic, I had been saying, it is in the discretion of the Department of Justice to not file cases, to direct simply that this should not be filed because there is a basis for not filing the case. No? That could have happened, but many of these cases were filed. Let's say for curfew violators, rather than, for example, locking them up in a jail, exposing them unnecessarily to COVID, they could have been just brought home, given a warning, maybe later on asked to do community service, all of those things. Option naman lahat yan eh.
But one quarantine measure that caught the attention of the public and officials alike was the proposal to authorize the police to conduct house-to-house searches for COVID-19 patients. This was back in July when reports of coronavirus cases started to soar and many patients with mild or asymptomatic cases were self-isolating at home.
That was an experiment in pushing the envelope, for example, that would have been implemented had it not been for the outrage that it provoked. It's problematic because the Constitution does not allow for searches to happen without a warrant. And a warrant can only be issued based on probable cause for a crime that is committed. And so it is not a crime to not report someone who is sick and self-isolating at home. That whole concept was so problematic, not only because it was going to be led by non-health professionals who wouldn't possibly recognize a sick person from a non-sick person, but also because of the constitutional parameters. So, in a very real way, it would be a modification of Tokhang, knocking on the door and asking to be allowed to enter without even a basis for knocking on the door. Because, the Constitution requires that even by knocking on the door, you need to have probable cause to knock on the door.
The Philippines has had the longest lockdown in the world, and yet the number of COVID cases since March has passed the 300,000 mark. One concern that has emerged is that when a health crisis is led by force and not science, it can create an atmosphere of fear, not understanding.
The use of force, even the appearance of force in implementing quarantine measures, really betrays that perspective that the only way government can make sure that people follow the regulations is to enforce it by force. They're of course forgetting the other side of the coin, that if they communicate well, if they are transparent in what they want to do, if they explain to people why they need to do this, and if people understand and accept and trust government, then they will not need to enforce it by force.
This story is part of a Pan-Asian series on rights as affected by COVID. This was a project initiated by international media support. Muli, ako po si Robbie Alampay, Puma Podcast.
And I'm Ted Ter. For more podcasts on law and government, listen to TED Talks on Spotify, Stitcher, Anchor, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode was produced by Kat Ventura. It was edited by Mark Casillan. Follow Teka Teka on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen.